As you've become more familiar with Nietzsche's philosophy, you can start to grasp the importance of values to him, especially moral values. That's why in this video, we will focus on his conception of morality. Nietzsche is a German philosopher from the 19th century who's had a significant influence on his successors. He is considered one of the most influential philosophers of all time. He's particularly known for being contrarian, often opposing popular opinions and mainstream narratives. He rejects many philosophies considered references in Western thought, starting with Socrates. Apart from Schopenhauer, Nietzsche rarely agreed with anyone. He considered himself his disciple since he initially built the foundation of his philosophy on Schopenhauer's ideas, although he later distanced himself from him. One of their similarities is that they both developed a naturalistic approach to thought, meaning that they had a biological perspective on the nature of thinking. Nietzsche believed that ideas were mainly the result of bodily processes or products of the body. This implies that our physiological makeup determines our morality, and morality in turn shapes our intellect, so everything stems from the body. According to Nietzsche, physically weak people tend to have a weak morality, which results in weak ideas. This means that to understand an idea and fully grasp it, one must understand the body that produced it. So to understand moral systems, Nietzsche applied the same framework to examine the origin and history of morality. Instead of starting with the current situation, he examined the genealogy of morals to discover how morality emerged, who created it, and in what context. He believed that this was the only way to grasp the true nature of morality. He fiercely opposed that our moral systems were considered as absolute truth and transcendent values, and that's why he wanted to uncover their true nature. So in this video, we will follow his framework to try and understand the concept of morality from his perspective. Nietzsche argues that explaining morality's origin is crucial to understanding its essence. There is a historical dimension in Nietzsche's philosophy because for him, every idea and every value are primarily the results of a history. So to do that, he examined the heroes of ancient Greece, particularly the Homeric Greeks. He realized that heroes such as Achilles or Odysseus were considered virtuous and embodied an example of human excellence. So the question is, what made these characters heroic? Simply put, it's because they had an unblocked will to power and they were able to satisfy their desires in an impulsive and straightforward manner, even if that meant waging wars or engaging in actions that we might see as immoral, such as lying, stealing, or even killing. These heroes committed actions that we might today consider as immoral, but they did so without feeling guilty. In fact, they were even praised for their actions. You can even say that this is what made them heroes. This type of behavior and the values they embodied falls under what Nietzsche refers to as master morality, which is the morality of the strong. The essence of master morality refers to people who possess an unimpeded will to power. This concept does not only involve oppressing or harming people, although those aspects are part of it. In reality, the true power lies in the capacity to create new values and modes of perceptions. In simpler words, to live on your own terms. In this moral framework, good is defined as the ability to fulfill one's desires, while bad is being somehow constrained or blocked in trying to fulfill those desires. So to do this, the heroes or the masters created a new set of values that suited their pursuits and their endeavors. Therefore, the core of master morality is the ability to create and establish new values. Values that are coming from within and are not simply dictated by an external source. So this leads us to an important question. How did this conception of morality change over time? To answer this question, we need to examine Nietzsche's view on religion, which he believed was the main reason for the decay of ancient morality. Nietzsche is extremely critical of religion and critiques philosophies that presuppose an otherworldly realm. This means any idea that implies that there exists a world beyond our physical world, such as an afterlife. This could be the idea of heaven in monotheistic religions or nirvana in Buddhism. He strongly disagrees with the idea of a dualistic worldview because he sees it as a rejection of the world we live in. The desire for a world beyond our own implies a lack of acceptance and contentment with our current world. It suggests that we are unable to to cope with the difficulties we face and thus need a world where our difficulties cease to exist. This inability to adapt indicates a rejection of reality. He terms this attitude as resentment. For Nietzsche, all dualistic philosophies are philosophies of resentment. In other words, they condemn our world, and beyond that, they condemn life itself. They condemn life because instead of encouraging people to embrace it, they encourage people to reject it by promising a better afterlife, where they will be rewarded. And this is where Nietzsche sees the problem. Because in life, some are more endowed and more privileged by nature than others. Naturally, those who are less privileged are the ones most likely to adopt these dualistic philosophies and reject life. And according to Nietzsche, those who reject it most vehemently are the weak. The weak reject life because they are disadvantaged, and their only chance of winning is by changing the rules. It's a matter of survival. He concludes that the need to change the rules to better cope with the harsh realities of life was the foundation of slave morality. A morality based on resentment and a negation of the will to power. In other words, a negation of life itself. So let's understand why. For Nietzsche, the invention of morality is primarily a coping strategy employed by the weak to protect themselves from the strong. Morality is based on a set of prohibitions. Morality tells us what we must do and must not do, what is permissible and what is not. So what defines morality is restriction. It sets limits on our behavior. It dictates that we can't do everything we want and that we're obliged to consider others. Morality tells us that because others exist, we must respect them and value their lives as much as we value ours. The idea is that the other should never be treated merely as a means, but always as an end in themselves, or that I should treat others how I want to be treated. Therefore, one is required to limit their instincts and desires if they might use or hurt other people. It's crucial to understand that morality is primarily a system of social coexistence, enabling people to live peacefully alongside each other. Without morality, peaceful coexistence would be impossible. So good and evil are human creations aimed at agreeing on what is permissible and what isn't, to set limits on our behavior. To define morality simply, we can say that it's the valuation of good and the devaluation or condemnation of evil. This means that every act considered evil should automatically be accompanied by a feeling of culpability or guilt. And this is precisely where Nietzsche sees the problem. For him, the real problem doesn't lie so much in establishing rules of conduct, because after all, without such rules, coexistence would be challenging. The true issue for Nietzsche is the enterprise of guilt that accompanies morality. So let's link the dots together. The purpose of religion is to impose morality, and the purpose of morality is to impose guilt, and the purpose of guilt is to protect the weak. In other words, to protect the weak by preventing the strong from expressing their strength, by preventing the strong from being strong. You might ask, why does the weak need to be protected? And how does establishing a moral system protect them? The weak need protection because life is unfair, and if they play by the rules, they lose. And if human beings, like animals, are primarily impulsive creatures striving for survival, then it's evident that in this game, the life expectancy of the weak is reduced during conflicts for resources and necessities. The weak are somewhat in a disadvantaged position, since being weak doesn't position anyone to triumph in this life. Rather, it makes everything more difficult, leading to feelings of resentment. Despite modern attempts to deny the animal nature of human beings, the reality remains that strength, whether physical or psychological, continues to be an evolutionary advantage. In this scenario, the weak must find a way to prevent the strong from using their strength. So they invent morality. They create rules, values, and prohibitions that make the strong hesitate to use their force. And this, for Nietzsche, is the birth of morality. It's the weak's act of inventing a system that restrains the strong from employing their force. He argues that morality is a social construct created by the weak to establish the value of goodness, since they lack the means to be anything other than good. By elevating their goodness to a virtuous value, they create a framework that reshapes power dynamics and handicaps the strong, giving the weak an advantage. At first, this reasoning appears far-fetched, but think of it from society's perspective. The isolated strong individual becomes powerless when faced with a crowd of weak individuals. If the weak make up the majority of a population and manage to agree on what they want to condemn in the strong, then at that moment, they become the dominant force. And in that case, morality is simply a genuine endeavor to overturn values, a reversal of values that involves portraying strengths as a weakness and weakness as strength. It is the strength of the weak who, lacking individual strength, seeks to create collective strength. To give a concrete example, if you go back before Christianity, the slaves had to establish a unique moral system that was distinctly different from the one adopted by the masters. This moral system not only had to differ from the masters, but had to be the complete opposite of it. If slaves followed the moral order of the masters, which encouraged an unblocked will to power, it would only serve to exacerbate their disadvantaged position. Put yourself in the slave's shoe. If you couldn't freely pursue your desires and your ability to accomplish anything was restricted, then your only solution would be to invert the moral scales and flip the narrative, portraying the masters as the bad guys and you as the good guy. This is slave morality, a morality that helps slaves compensate for being unable to claim their will to power. So now you might ask, how would you do that? How would you put that in practice? Well, qualities that the masters valued, such as unrestrained power and the pursuit of excellence, were overturned and deemed undesirable by the slaves. They turned these ideas around to make their challenging lives more bearable and to find meaning in their constrained circumstances. In simpler terms, this inversion makes virtue a compensatory disguise for one's weakness and inability, a mask for the very things that made them slaves in the first place. Meekness becomes a virtue that masks a deficit of courage or physical strength. Chastity becomes a virtue that masks the fact that they can't fulfill their sexual desires. Frugality becomes a mask for the inability to acquire things and fulfill one's material desires. Humility becomes a virtue to conceal a lack of confidence or self-esteem. Forgiveness becomes a virtue to mask a fear of confrontation with the strong. You get the picture. It's an inversion for everything the strong used to do and the weak couldn't. In this moral version, the Greek virtue of excellence becomes essentially sinful. Nietzsche believed that Christianity arose in these conditions of oppression and enslavement under the Roman Empire. Thus, it adopted a moral system that aimed to protect the weak from the strong and consequently adopted a posture of resentment. The values promoted by slave morality, such as submission, meekness, and resignation, were also endorsed by Christian morality and vice versa. Nietzsche viewed the crucifixion of Christ as an example of these values, which he saw as promoting powerlessness and passivity. According to Nietzsche, Christ is the one who accepted his fate and didn't fight back. He made excuses for his oppressors, showing love even towards those who put an end to his vital impulse, to his life. To effectively apply this new morality, they focused on guilt. The idea is that if you don't respect this moral system, then it's considered as a sin and you eventually go to hell. For Nietzsche, this promotion of weak values was simply the result of deep resentment. This resentment is directed towards people whose will to power is relatively unblocked. Those who do what they want without feeling remorse or guilt, pursuing their desires straightforwardly and without shame. Resentment arises toward those who seem powerful and unapologetically embrace their power, almost in a childlike manner. However, Nietzsche suggests that the true target of this resentment isn't necessarily these people themselves, but rather life, for casting certain people into the role of slaves, the role of the weak, with a limited will to power. In Nietzsche's view, the moral value of an act isn't determined by its form, but by its strength, which refers to a manifestation of the will to power. He identifies a slave morality rooted in life-denying actions, driven by resentment, hate, grudges, and bitterness, contrasting with the life-affirming principles of combat, growth, and acquisition. The morality of resentment is rooted in negation and reactivity toward others. It's always based on a constant comparative relationship with others, driven by jealousy and moral weakness. While the strong express a proactive desire to undertake, produce, and create, the weak operate in a reactive mode. The weak are trapped in their feelings and are driven by the need to justify themselves and prove things to others. The need for constant validation stems from a lack of confidence and reassurance. The perfect example nowadays would be the virtue signaling we constantly see online. People who want to demonstrate their exemplary character and impress others. They live for others and not for themselves. They play a role to elevate their moral and social value, but it's simply a futile attempt to conceal their weaknesses. The overman doesn't play a role. They simply exist. They assert their will to power and are immersed in life. This is not to be reduced to a mere display of dominance, which is another misunderstanding of Nietzsche's philosophy. It simply means that the overman Superman is aware of their capabilities and strength and thus doesn't require constant validation or to prove anything to anyone. They live for themselves. In Nietzsche's philosophy, the strong is primarily a warrior of life, someone who embraces and doesn't shy away from the conflicts inherent to life. They are conscious that life is not only about peace and love, but also involves suffering, conflict, and destruction, the things that pave the way for new creation and discovery. The strong individual doesn't complain about life's challenges because they know that suffering is necessary and temporary. Most importantly, they recognize that wanting life to shield them away from suffering would be a desire for life to cease being life. The strong person accepts life wholeheartedly, laughing at its misfortune and dancing with its complexities. To finish, I want to give you a quick reflective exercise. Sit down for 10 minutes and examine your values. See if you're creating or simply being reactive to others. See what parts of your values are truly yours and what parts are simply masks to hide your weaknesses. These could be the things holding you back in life. Acknowledge any life-denying forces within you and fight them. Understand that the only way to get rid of them is to adopt a different approach and express your will to power. The will to evolve, the will to create, and the will to become. This will allow you to stand tall and truly live for yourself. Thank you for watching.